I'm going to hand things over to our first speaker, Professor Jamie Boyle from Duke University, who will talk about reinventing the Gatekeeper. He wanted me to give a quick plug, which I will do, for something really cool, which you should all know about if you don't, and we'll leave it up on the screen, which is this comic book that he and his colleagues put together on fair use, participatory media, and it's focusing on documentary film. It's a guide that walks through all these issues, and it's very cool. You can sort of browse around it, zoom in on it, print it off of the internet. We'll leave it up there, but let me hand it over to Jamie Boyle. Jamie.
Thank you. Thanks very much, and thank you for inviting me to this remarkable event. This was a daunting assignment. My main specialization is not in communications law, but in IP, and when I was invited to do this, Susie and Jake basically gave me my brief as to what I was to do. I was to sum up the policy, perhaps also the technical challenges, to the future of telecom beyond broadcast. Intellectual property, of course. I should probably cover communications law, also regulation, all the issues of policy, the threats, but don't be negative. Focus on the positive side of things, look at the opportunities and the threats. A high-level view, make sure it's concrete and very detailed with a lot of individual actionable take-home items that people can use, kind of like put a brick in your cyber toilet to save the internet, I guess. And you should leave time for questions. Apart from its utter impossibility, that talk has much to recommend it. I'm not going to give it because it's impossible. My original focus was, my original title was How to Ruin the Promise of Participatory Media. Susie quickly and appropriately deleted that because it sounded like a downer. One of the key things, no downers, right? So there are going to be no downers in this talk. So let me start, even though I'm Scottish, with the optimistic part. We are, as everyone who's here needs no reminding, in the middle of this kind of exciting, somewhat scary flowering of human potential across communications media. It has literary, cultural, political, scientific, artistic aspects. It's hard to get a hand on. It's very hard to predict. That's going to be one of my themes. Some of it has happened, and most of the people in this room have a sense that most of it is still to come. That's incredibly exciting. My talk is about how not to screw it up. I'm not completely shameless, so I will try and do some of the things they asked me to do. How not to screw it up, not just on the level of national policy, although I think that's important, and I think it's vital that the people in this room be involved in that debate, and they aren't always involved in that debate. But how not to screw it up on the level of individual companies, media organizations, newspapers, blogs, whatever, who themselves are struggling with the questions of what this future is. So I'm going to start from two propositions. The first proposition ought to be self-evident, which is that we are extremely bad at predicting the future of any kind of new technological innovation. We're just very, very bad at it. Cell phones were predicted by the FCC to be a niche market which would reach 400,000 people in the US and 1 million worldwide. Would that they had been right, but sadly they were wrong. That's not the world that we live in. When the telephone itself was first introduced, many of its developers believed that it was going to be used as a one-to-many system. Everyone in Boston would pick up the phone at 9 p.m. and go, "The weather tomorrow will be rainy," and make you wish you had stayed in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. They actually used it that way in Albania for a while, right? This is a one-to-many system. Remember predictions, even from the recent past? Push media are the thing of the future. Pointcast. Remember Pointcast? Well, you're probably not old enough to remember Pointcast. Now you might say, but wait, some people have correctly predicted things. Some people predicted blogs. Some people predicted video logs. Some people predicted tagging. Some people... Well, of course, that's because people predicted everything. Some of them had to be right? Afterwards, we can all go, see, he was right? Well, of course he was right, because you're not looking at all the million people who were totally and insanely wrong. So, first is the assumption that on the level of policy, but also on the level of the individual organization, WGBH, trying to figure out beyond broadcast, we are very, very bad at predicting the future. So you can see why they told me not to be a downer. I actually don't think that's such a bad thing. I think we just have to understand it and that there are implications both for policy and for individual strategy. So first principle is the principle of technological humility. The second assumption requires a little more introduction. For about the last 15 years, academics have been very excited about something called behavioral economics, which revealed, surprise, surprise to those of you who aren't economists, that individuals did not perform in the way that rational actor theory predicted. How did they not perform? Well, they weren't risk neutral. They were much more worried about future potential losses than they were about future potential gains. Economic theory had predicted they would be indifferent between the two. This is why people out there spend ludicrous amounts of money buying warranties for their appliances. You know, it's a market that shouldn't exist. It does. That's why. They also they didn't use rational calculation. They relied on heuristics, rules of thumb, which were embedded and frequently wrong. They vastly underestimated some kinds of risk and vastly overestimated others. No, darling, we can't let you fly there. We'll drive there. It'll be safer. No, right? That's not right. That's wrong. And we do that all the time, both individually and collectively. But the thing was that these patterns, these forms of bounded rationality, these particular baseline errors, these tendencies to overestimate, underestimate risk, the interesting thing is they weren't random. They were patterned. You could understand them. I want to propose a similar pattern, a similar cognitive blindness, a similar inability to see certain kinds of potential and an ability to overestimate certain kinds of risks in the world of communications. It is a blindness, or at least an inability to see clearly, the potential of commons-based production, that is to say, the potential of forms of media which are not tightly controlled by property rights, by rules, by ownership, by direct technical control, to generate interesting kinds of content. But not just to generate interesting kinds of content, that we are blind at every level of network policy to the opportunities that commons-based production, that the non-property, less control, open access side of things tends to offer. Now let me quickly make clear what I'm saying here. In any system, whether you're trying to figure out how to generate cultural content, what rights do you give the people who create it, what rights do you reserve to the public, what rights of reuse there are. When you're trying to design a network and you're trying to say, well, the protocols that the network runs on, think TCP, IP, HTML, whatever you want, should these be owned and controlled, or should these be open, that people can use them without permission? The network itself, how should that run? How should the physical architecture work? The design of the computer. Should the computer be a general-purpose machine you can program to do anything, or should it be narrowly constrained to do certain types of things? At every level, and here I'm drawing particularly on the work of Larry Lessig and Yochai Benkler, at every level of the system, we have to have a balance between the ideas of protection, enclosure, closedness, property, proprietariness, and the side of openness. Leave the protocols open. We're speaking English, at least notionally, this being the United States. When we speak English, we don't have to ask permission, right? It's like, may I speak English? Are you licensed to speak English? Let me look at your end-user license agreement. What English are you speaking? My students are speaking English 0.5 frequently, but I'm speaking English 1.0. Now, you might say, well, that's ridiculous. Of course languages are open, but it's not ridiculous at all. Languages have frequently been closed. The scribes controlled literacy. Lawyers have invented private languages for years, arguably you still do, but law French was actually an officially limited language that was controlled by individuals, right? That's a communications protocol, okay? Language is about as fundamental a communications protocol as you can have. They did have communications protocol before geeks. And we have to decide how open it is to be or how closed. That happens on every level, from content generation through network design to the individual organization trying to figure out I hear participant-generated content is big. How exactly do we do that? Right? How much do we let them do? How much do we hold on and control? And do we own it afterwards? At every level, we have to make those decisions. And the answer is not always open, open, open. I want to be very clear on that. The answer is a balance. My point is this. We tend systematically to undervalue the importance of the open side and to see the dangers of openness, whereas we see the potential of closedness. We have a systematic cognitive bias, is my claim, and we ought to be aware of it, whether we're policymakers or individual executives. Okay. Now, you might say, well, that's fine, but the behavioral economists actually have data to back up what they say, right? They had experiments, which generally mysteriously seem to either involve mugs, or they really do, they involve mugs. How do you feel about your mug now? I value it highly now that I have it. They involve games where you have to split up $100 and you have to decide, how to split it up. They involve a variety of other things. What do you have to back up what you say? Well, of course, I'm a law professor. Generally, we don't do data. We do anecdata at best. But I think that we actually have some indications that this pattern I'm describing is real, enough at least to be worried about it and certainly to study it more. What indications are there? What evidence is there that we have this blindness or this insufficient realization of the potential and overestimation of the dangers of the open side? Well, you could pick the last 20 years of IP law, intellectual property law, as kind of the classic example. We have been faced over and over again with questions, Should we retrospectively extend the copyright term for dead authors in the hope that this will make them write again? Yes! Great idea. Hollywood's graveyard. Right? Okay, we have now the potential of digitizing nearly everything in the world. What should we do? Make sure to extend copyright even though only about 6% of works after 20 years are being commercially exploited. That way the other 94% will remain locked up for 80 years, unable for anyone to use them. A massive social cost with a small, actually, potential benefit to the people who get the rights. Good job. Way to go. Probably the single most inefficient subsidy ever provided. Right? Really is. It's just amazing. This in an era where people say, well, is there any proof that teaching poor kids to read is actually socially valuable? Show me some evidence. We're perfectly happy to say, would you like another heaping slice of monopoly rent, sir, for another 20 years for stuff you've already created? Yes, I think I would. Well, there you go. No data required. That's a certain inability to understand the costs imposed by locking up everything when most of it is not still being generated, right at the moment when we could have digitized the world and made it available globally. There are other examples. WIPO is now discussing a new broadcaster's right. This is actually brilliant on so many levels. So the broadcaster's right, for those of you who don't know, you produce something, you produce a film, it's copyrighted, right? You put it on a network. In the United States, that's pretty much it. You make a deal with a network. If somebody copies it illicitly, that's a copyright violation. You have a contract with the network. Everything seems to be great. Many countries in the rest of the world, however, signed something called the Rome Treaty, which provided a broadcaster's right. The broadcaster's right was an entirely different copyright-like right that lay on top of copyright. So I have my copyright in the film. You broadcast it. Now you have a right over it too, right? Just by broadcasting it. And if somebody gets that copy, say, of the broadcast and comes to me and say, hey, I saw your film or I saw you interviewed and I'd like to rebroadcast it. Can I do it? The broadcaster now can veto. We've introduced another middleman, right? The broadcaster can say, no, I have a right. Now, if you can get it independently, fine, you can broadcast it. But now, because I broadcast it, I get a right. The argument for this right, as always is the argument for the closed side, incentives and control. And these are important arguments. So the argument is we won't build networks unless we can recoup additionally beyond all of our other abilities as broadcasters, for example, to exclude advertisers or to encode our broadcasts or to prosecute people for signal piracy or whatever it is. We need this extra right in the underlying stuff. Now, as the rest of the world, much of the rest of the world had the broadcast right, the United States didn't. As you all know, the broadcast industry in the United States crashed as a result, and there are now no broadcasters in the United States. In fact, there are so many fewer broadcasters in the US than in the rest of the world that we can see that this right was necessary. No, that would be wrong too. So what should we do? Well, clearly the answer is extend it, right? We have this totally unnecessary right. Let's extend it some more. That's a great idea. Let's make it last for 50 years instead of 20. Oh, and let's apply it to webcasts. Why? But wait, this is an unnecessary right, and now you're applying it to something which is totally different. The economics of webcasts are totally different than the economics of broadcasts, where your argument was bad to begin with. They got it. We should get it too. This is the quality of the debate. It is a pathetic quality. It is ridiculous. And your elected representatives may soon move forward to introduce this broadcast right, which means that all of you who worry about clearing copyrights on stuff you find on the net, great, you're going to have a whole new set of middlemen to deal with. Congratulations. These are your government dollars at work. Now, this is dumb, okay? It's dumb in a rich, patterned, complex way. A fine dumbness, like a 70 Margot. Because it's not random, right? It's patterned, and that's my point. We make these decisions all the time that are just, now you might say, well, it's rent-seeking. Well, great, okay, I understand rent-seeking. Rent-seeking does occasionally happen in politics, in fact, maybe all the time. But the point is that frequently companies make these decisions that are clearly and palpably against their own self-interest. It's hard for us to find this out because they almost always succeed in locking stuff up, so we don't have the counterexamples. But occasionally, very occasionally, they lose. Viz, the attempt by movie companies to make it illegal to copy TV programs off broadcasts and time shift. So, right, that was their attempt. They wanted to make it illegal. They tried in the Supreme Court to do so. What happened? They lost. That's surprising. They don't often lose, but they lost there. Did the movie industry collapse as a result? No, it turned out that that was a brilliant, a strategic triumph for them to lose that. By losing that, we got the ability to make easy, free copies of movies. The price of video recorders dropped with the legal penalty no longer threatening it. We got massive penetration of the market by VCRs. And suddenly people have these VCRs sitting there, so what do they want to do? They want to go and rent some tapes. And so for a long time, it's now fading out. The movie industry produced most of its revenue from renting tapes. That was a new business model. It's one that they hadn't thought about. They wanted to lock things up. They wanted to control it. It turned out that not controlling it actually produced, in part, a whole new market they hadn't really even thought about. That's a classic example. We tend not to see these issues. Remember, I'm saying there's always a balance. It's not that open is always right. That's not what I'm saying. But we tend to undervalue open. Why? I think there are a bunch of reasons. I think that our understanding of property is partly deeply encoded as being around stuff like this. And with stuff like this, property rights are actually, kind of important. If I have the water, you can't have it. If I'm controlling the water, then, I know whether or not somebody else is drunk from it. If I'm running a farm, I want to know that I can grow things and I can get back the return from them. I want to be able to kick people off the farm, to employ people and get rid of them if they're not working hard enough, to stop people coming in. And for all of those reasons, when we're controlling physical, tangible, limited property, the idea of high levels of control makes a great deal of sense on the economic, but also just on the visceral level. It's mine. We're just not very good yet at understanding intangible stuff. Right? We just don't have the instincts for it. We come to it and you go, it's like property. Theft is theft, right? That's, we sort of... And the answer is, well, it's like property, tangible property in some ways, but not in others. For one thing, it's really hard to deplete an idea, right? It's hard to overfish an idea, right? It's hard to claim, my God, I told my students all about fair use today. Now I don't know anything about it. It's not the way ideas work, right? Actually, it might be in my case, but it's not supposed to be the idea. In questions, we could get to cases where you actually can deplete ideas. You can deplete certain things. You can deplete songs by overplaying them, for example. So there are examples, but counterexamples. But by and large. And so what I'm trying to say is, the first thing is, I think our assumptions about control and design are built around a set of experiences with the world, which by and large, maybe this generation is different, are material, not digital. And so we tend to take that mindset and move it over, and it doesn't work very well. That doesn't mean we're always wrong. That's the point. That's what makes it so complicated. But it means that we're wrong by inclination, right? We tend the wrong way. To give an example, game companies routinely do this. Wow, we have a whole bunch of people who are willing to work for free to develop massive new layers of our games, lots of new levels. What should we do? Strategy 1, forbid them and threaten them with suit, right? Good, way to go. Strategy 2, let them do it and then kick them out and tell them it's all copyrighted by us. That way they'll feel positively towards us, right? It's like, you don't seem to be really getting it, guys. It's like this is not like your yard, right? That's going to get muddy with a whole bunch of people walking through it. So there are lots of other examples. I've actually written in work on the enclosure movement what some of them are. I think there are ideas they're specific ideas based on our notion of authorship, that authors produce stuff out of nothing. So we tend not to think of authors as people who need raw material. Like, you build your song or your novel or your painting out of nothing. So we don't then say, well, where did you get it from? And that leads us to undervalue the public domain and fair use. I think law professors actually have a role to blame here. I don't know what Charlie would think about this, but it's hard to think of a law school exam in which the correct answer is make sure your client doesn't have any control. Make sure your client doesn't get to lock things up. Make sure your client doesn't have maximum freedom while everybody else has minimum freedom. The way that we normally, as we train people to be lawyers, assume that the correct answer is at the end of the day, your client should end up with all the rights and basically everybody else shouldn't end up with very many, and you should have maximum control and they shouldn't. It's not clear that that assumption is going to play very well in this world, because that may not be the best solution, just as a business method, let alone as a regulatory strategy. Okay. Let me give one quick example of how this might play out. So imagine that I now surgically or in other ways removed from your brain the knowledge of the last 14 years. It's 1992. I come to you and I say, okay, here we are in 1992. We're assembling this group, this whole group, maybe bring in some more regulators, even more people from industry, bring in a bunch of lawyers. And what we have to do, what we have to decide here at Harvard Law School is, we're thinking of having this kind of, internet thingy. And the question is how to design it. And we have to make some key architectural decisions. Now, there is this proposal, comes to some sort of wacky group, that this thing should be sort of open, that the protocols should be open, that anyone should be able to connect to it, that the network itself should be basically, completely, dumb, that the intelligence should reside at the ends, that people should be able to take this platform without permission from anyone and develop their own apps on it that we haven't even thought of, that we wouldn't even own the protocols by which they transmit it, and the terminals which they use wouldn't even be designed to do certain things, so they could make them do anything. Remember, you don't have the memories of the last 14 years. You don't have Google Maps, you don't have Wikipedia, you don't have Google, you don't have the proliferation of information that now runs your life, right? You are yourself in 1992. So what would we say? Well, I think if we were fair, we'd say, this is a disaster. What's going to happen? There'll be porn. Check. There'll be porn. There'll be porn. There'll be piracy. There will be piracy. Well, you're right. Actually, I hadn't thought of that. But there will be a lot of piracy. That's worse than porn. That could lead to dancing. There'll be porn and piracy. There'll be spam, right? There'll be wackos. There'll be people up there. It's like, the New York Times and NPR won't be able to give us the truth. There'll be all these people who say, I think something different. And they'll just speak to millions of people without us vetting them. We need to vet them. We need to see, NPR, okay, check, you can have a site, and New York Times, okay, who are you? I don't know who you are. I'm not letting you talk to the public. No. I think being fair, being ourselves, but with just the last 14 years removed from our brains, you have to admit, what would we invent? We'd invent Minitel, the French network of the 1980s. We'd invent a set of terminals that did a very limited number of things under the control of a central agency. And then, because we're public-spirited, we'd give poor people some extra time on it. Come on, that's what we do. I think that's the proof. That is the proof of my point. The only reason we can imagine what we've got is because we've got it. It was an accident, guys. It was a bunch of things that came together. The internet, in my view, is an historical anomaly. It's not that history is sweeping us towards greater openness relentlessly. It was a bunch of geeks doing some stuff who wanted, for their own reasons, things designed a certain way, and suddenly, bam, it was too big to control. So what should we do now? At every stage, at every level, we're trying to undo what has happened. The computers are general purpose. Well, they shouldn't be, and when you get Windows Vista loaded on yours, they won't be. Trusted computing will make sure that you only do the approved tasks, right? Or you won't be able fully to participate in the world. And as for the network itself, this kind of, anyone could just be up there and do whatever they want. No. We, the people who make the networks, we need to be able to privilege certain kind of content. Disney content needs to flow 17 times as fast as some video bloggers. That's just the market working. We've got to close that down. We've got to have property rights and control there. This net neutrality stuff, it's communism. At the level of content, we need more digital rights management. You notice how much consumers love DRM? We need more of it, right? We really just need a lot more of it so that it's so embedded that there's just no space outside it. It's the space outside it that causes all the problems. And on the level of the individual company, well, you're involved in your own individual organizations, but I know you've been involved in these fights inside your organizations, and tell me, am I not saying the truth that there's always this, let them comment on it? But what will they say? Better not to. At every level, we underestimate the potential of the commons. Now, you might say, but wait, you admitted that we can't know ex ante where to set the balance, that it's an empirical question. It is, it's an empirical question. It's not a religious question. For some of you, it is a religious question. Open is great. Well, I reluctantly and firmly part company from you there. I think it's an empirical question. Sometimes you do need control, right? That's the point. That's what makes this so interesting. We say, well, great, so you've told us that we're messed up, that our brains don't work right to understand this new world. It's kind of an accident, we've got it, and we'll likely screw it up. Thanks very much. I thought there were going to be no downers in this talk. I actually think it's not a downer, because I think once we're aware of a particular kind of cognitive skew, we actually have a remarkable ability to deal with it. If you're a pilot, you learn that your perceptions get screwed up when you're flying instruments only. You get taught. Don't trust your sense of balance, rely on the indicator, right? You learn that because you learn about your own perceptual weaknesses. You learn in any complex situation where people have to make decisions under extreme stress, whether you're a hostage negotiator or a professor teaching a group of first-year law students, that there are certain kinds of things that you're likely to do that you just shouldn't do. Human beings have the ability to be aware of their cognitive biases and to take that into account. I'm trying to put one out there and saying we should, at every level of policy and network design, a policy and intellectual property, a policy in the way individual computers work, and even down to the net neutrality debate. So what's the take-home then? What's the brick to put in the cyber toilet? Well, first of all, I think, coming back to my first point, we're very bad at predicting the future, technologically speaking. And we know that. And we can incorporate that too. So putting those two factors together, first thing to do is to make sure that you leave as open as possible for as long as possible the construction, design, system under which you're working. Make sure as many different kinds of feedback come to you which can allow the eyes of others to see potential that you do not, and perhaps to make that potential work. Wherever it is possible, push a little bit on your sense of just how much control is needed. Don't introduce crummy new rights like the completely unnecessary webcast right, which serves only as an extra barrier to entry and a massive new problem of orphan works. Don't give up on net neutrality, which actually gave us what we got, because we're saying, oh, I never understood how this commons thing worked anyway. Better just to have a lot more property rights. Having said all that, again, it's not a religious question. It's an empirical question. and sometimes we need control. Let me close with another anecdote, not the invention of the net now, but another anecdote about commons-based production, which I use to try and force myself to think more carefully about these issues. Again, it's 1992. Again, I've surgically removed your knowledge of the next 14 years. And I come to you and say, listen, WGBH Boston has been given the job of designing the greatest reference work the world has ever seen. This is the Encyclopedia Britannica on steroids. May I note, by the way, that the original Encyclopedia Britannica comes from Scotland, and that I'm very proud to say that it came in 3 volumes, the first of which was A to B, which shows one of the Scottish problems with planning time. A to B was so large because the first 2 major entries were on accountancy, 80 pages, and brewing, over 100 pages. So you want the Encyclopedia Britannica on steroids. It's 1992, and I say to you, what do you need? And listen, you have the minds of, the great intellects here to advise you. And so you get together, you caucus, and you say, well, look, okay, so the lawyers tell us this is what we need. First of all, we need very strong property rights and control over content. Why? Because we're going to have to invest millions of dollars in hiring the best people around the world to write content. And obviously, we're going to have to be able to exclude people from that content to pay for it, right? So that's fairly obvious, right? That's the only way it could work. What's more, we're going to need tight authorial control because, some of the people out there are wacky. So we're going to hire someone who looks, on his face like he's a reasonable law professor, and he's going to produce this kind of Area 51, embrace the commons stuff. But it's fine, we can fire him and not put his entry in because we have control over what appears in the Encyclopedia WGBHia, right? We have control. Trademarks. We definitely need a trademark because we want this to stand for quality, right? So that when people see it, they know it. And we have to be able to police that so that people don't claim this is what the Encyclopedia WGBHia says, when in fact it doesn't. And that needs to be our business model too, right? Lots and lots of control. Because otherwise it won't get developed. Okay, there's our plan. Okay, so when's the last time any of you ever looked at an encyclopedia? You use Google. Wait, 1992 self gets told this. Okay, so just help me out on this. You get a bunch of wackos around the world with some smart people mixed in, and they all type a bunch of stuff on this network, which is like open to all of them, and put it up, and truth comes out of this? I don't think so. I mean, how can you tell what the good stuff is? Well, it's hard, but, we have these search engines that rank according to how much people link. We have this waterhole searching, where we kind of follow where the other animals go in order to find the waterhole. We have, not my term. We have this ability to use this kind of amazingly crude but nevertheless fascinating form of peer review. Well, yeah, but fine. But may I say that you, this imaginary guy from the future, this is all nonsense. No one would ever create this stuff, right? So you're claiming that this is like, you found about Saluki dogs or, the way that the Renaissance actually worked in Italy or, the costumes of medieval England. And there's just all these people out there, I don't even know who they are. They sit and they type it, they put it up and they write and they link. It's like, why would they do it? There's no incentive, guys. So look. You come to me and you tell me of this fantasy world of hundreds of people, millions of people doing something for no conceivable reason that I can see, right? And putting it up for free, yeah, like that would happen. And then it all gets linked together by some, like, quote, search engines. Yeah, like there's a business doing that, right? Yeah, like, here's more drivel, I've arranged it for you. And then all of this is going to be better than the Encyclopedia Britannica? This is the most ludicrous thing that you have ever heard in 1992. It's the most ludicrous thing. It just happened to be true. Thank you. And I have saved my 10 minutes for questions. Who's going to do the mics? Do I just
We got mics back here.
Questions? They're bringing you a mic so that you can be preserved for posterity and doubtless sold in a limited edition by the Berkman Center.
Hi, my name's Shava Nirad. I'm with tor.eff.org.
Hi.
And I was interested in the way that you talked about the way that change is undervalued. Because what I see in that is that the major anxiety when you have change being undervalued is that the players are going to change. Yes, the pool of money is always there. Mm-hmm. But how do you counter the anxiety of the established players that they are not going to be the established players of the next generation? That's, to me, that's the culture war. Right.
That's a great question. So the point here is, yeah, sure, it may be efficient, it may produce social surplus, it may be better for First Amendment values or whatever, but maybe I'm not going to be in the catbird seat when, the dust settles, and so I'm against it even if it is good. And that's clearly one of the major motivations. It's not just a motivation about will it work. One record executive in the UK said that media companies have to embrace what he calls Tarzan economics, which is letting go of the last income stream before the next vine is actually within your grasp. That's very scary, right? Maybe you're not Tarzan, maybe you're George of the Jungle, and you won't find out until you've already let go. So that's definitely real. We compound that quite brilliantly with the way that we design both communications policy and IP. I explained to one political science colleague how intellectual property rights were made. He clasped his hands and goes, "It's the most perfect example of industry capture I've ever seen." The way that we make the rules, which is really quite brilliant, is that we allow the people who have the current business models to rule on whether a new business model would be illegal. Now think about this for a moment, right? Electric light, right? So you put to the whale oil companies who produce whale oil for lamps. So is this electric light stuff legal? No, right. So of course you're right about that. Yes, it is a matter of industry competition. On the other hand, I believe two things. First of all, even inside those industries, they frequently systematically underestimate their own values. For example, had Microsoft won more quickly about the vision of intellectual property rights that it wished to instantiate, much of what it did with Apple, with the user interface, would probably have been illegal. Right? Companies, even at every stage of the growth cycle, have interests in both openness and closedness. Right? So it's more complex. The second thing is, if we're more aware of this tension between the balance of the open and the closed, I think we do regulatory policy a lot better. The way that we do it right now is basically say, let's turn environmental policy over to industry. Of course, that's what we're doing environmental policy too. But we have at least an awareness, I think, in other areas of regulatory policy that there are reasons for openness. I agree with you that that's a problem. It's the problem of industry capture. It's the problem of people who are currently established getting to write the rules for the future. One thing I guess I'm trying to do is develop a culture, a heuristic, which pushes against that very powerful, feature of just money and power. That's a kind of feature of skepticism, in the same way that we use antitrust as a kind of skepticism, in the same way that we use democracy as a principle of openness to break down different kinds of hierarchies. I think we need a similar openness about property as a kind of counterweight, I guess. But you're right, I think it's a very important qualification.
Yeah, my name is Gio Geller. I'm a documentary filmmaker doing a documentary called Who's Wearing the Emperor's New Clothes? Uh-huh. If so many people believe in something, how can it be wrong? And just a comment and a question. I was talking to a friend of mine who runs a psychiatric center, and we were talking about time yesterday, and he said that during the French Revolution, the people were shooting at the clocks, the time. And during the Russian Revolution, it was founded because the typesetters were rebelling because they weren't getting paid for the dots and the commas like the other letters. So maybe we're in a time of rebellion in our own way, and we need to be thinking about participatory media as the beginning of thinking for ourselves rather than this top-down management, which is what Wikipedia is kind of a model of, not top-down management. So my question to you is, what do you think people of the future are going to say about us today?
That's a good one. I hope it's not, wow, they really screwed it up. I think that the thing that they will do is say these people were caught in a cognitive dilemma. And the cognitive dilemma, which was that they had been trained to have this very strong assumption that control, property rights, incentives, and so forth was the normal way to go, with a few limited exceptions, democracy, competition, but by and large, this was the norm. And then they had this massive counterexample that was kind of sitting right in front of them, which was the Internet and the stuff that the Internet had enabled. And this was the black swan, right? This was the swan that proved that all swans are not white. And the question was, how would they deal with it? Would they deny it? That's always a fundamental human way of dealing with things, right? Would they trivialize it or marginalize it? Would they try and regulate it so it went away, so that the nasty counterexample didn't exist anymore? Or would they say, this indicates that our models of the world are wrong, right? The place where we said the map ended is actually not where the map ends. I kind of hope that the answer to that question is that they looked at the counterexample and said, our maps of the world are limited and maybe the world is different than we imagined, but I'm not enough of an optimist to say that that's the way things will go. No doubters, that's right. Any more?
Okay, I think we're going to move to our next one. Thank you, Professor Boyle.
Thanks very much. Buy the comic.